The Sherman Antitrust Act regulates all kinds of businesses within the United States, preventing them from forming monopolies and infringing on consumer rights. But what does that have to do with the real estate industry? Well, the Sherman Antitrust Act plays a vital role in regulating the housing industry just like any other. Any real estate professionals who violate federal antitrust law could find themselves in a whole lot of trouble. Hello everybody, it's Zach here from realestatelicensewizard.com. Today we're talking about the Sherman Antitrust Act. We're going to be covering what you need to know, its definition, and give some examples. Let's get started. So what is the Sherman Antitrust Act? Well, the Sherman Antitrust Act is the first federal law prohibiting contracts, conspiracies, or agreements that restrain trade. This act also prohibited businesses from forming monopolies or trusts. A monopoly is when one seller in the market is offering a commodity, service, or good. The seller has no competition, so they can raise their prices to any rate they see fit. The consumer has no choice but to buy from the monopoly and is entirely at their mercy regarding pricing. Luckily, colluding or merging to form a monopoly is now considered unlawful, thanks to the Sherman Antitrust Act and other antitrust laws. Now, while the Sherman Antitrust Act created an important precedent, we should note that it has since been replaced with new federal acts that better uphold antitrust legislation, which don't worry, we'll talk about in this video. So what are the antitrust laws specifically? Well, antitrust laws are a collection of federal and state government laws that regulate the conduct and organization of business corporations. These laws typically aim to promote fair competition for the benefit of consumers. The three major antitrust laws are the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Act, and the Federal Trade Commission Act. So let's start with the Sherman Antitrust Act. Why exactly was that passed, and where does that fit into everything? So originally, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890 to break up big monopolies dominating their markets at the time. Some of those were Standard Oil, American Tobacco, J.P. Morgan. They were all single sellers of their goods in the United States market. The Sherman Antitrust Act broke up these trusts, which helped regulate the prices of goods and gave consumers more power. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with real estate, right? Well, the Sherman Act prohibits several behaviors that compromise a fair housing market. So one of which is price fixing, bid rating, group boycotting, market allocation, tie-in agreements. I'll put those on the screen for you. Now, these are all examples of antitrust violations in real estate. But what exactly do they each do? Let's talk about that. So first, price fixing. Price fixing is a practice of setting the price of a good or service to make a particular price a standard. Any agreement, even if it's just implied with other brokerages, to set a standard commission rate violates antitrust law. One example of price fixing would be two brokers getting together and agreeing to offer their clients the same price or commission rate. This interferes with the fair market and means that clients will have to pay higher prices. Next is bid rigging. Bid rigging is an illegal practice where competitors agree in advance on who will win a bid on a property. This creates higher pricing than what would have normally naturally occurred in a free market, effectively cheating consumers into paying more. For example, if two competing real estate agents agree to take turns being the lowest bidder to drive up the price of the home sale, that would be considered bid rigging. Next would be group boycotting. This is when two or more people conspire against another business by no longer supporting or working with it. For example, if two brokers agreed never to conduct business with a third broker to have less competition, that's a clear violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Another one is market allocation. That is when real estate brokers divide the market amongst themselves so they don't have to compete with each other. This behavior is considered engaging in monopolistic practices, and it violates antitrust law. One example of market allocation is if brokers decided to split up their area into different regions, designating a different real estate agent for each spot. This means that within each region, there is no competition, and home sellers will end up having to pay more. And then finally, tie-in arrangements. A tie-in arrangement is when sellers require the purchase of another separate product or service for the sale of the first. An example of a tie-in agreement would be if a real estate agent agreed to sell a property only if the buyer agrees to list the property with their firm. So that's pretty much the ones that you need to know that have to pertain with the Sherman Antitrust Act. And I actually am going to go in details on this channel with each one of those as well. So keep your eyes out for that if you fully didn't understand those when I went through them. So what are the penalties then for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act? Well, the penalties for Breaking these laws include hefty fines and even jail time in some cases. Many people normally don't pursue legal action against offenders, as the costs and time that went into these court cases were normally not deemed fully worth it. But that has since changed. The government, and specifically the Supreme Court, has changed kind of how these things work, nearly making these original antitrust laws obsolete. But many consumers didn't feel they could win originally these antitrust law cases against big businesses, which is why they came up with these new ones, these new acts, which brings us up to the Clayton Act. So what is the Clayton Act? Well, like the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Act of 1914 was designed to break up monopolies and ensure fair competition in the market. So what does that have to do with the antitrust law originally that the Sherman Antitrust Act maybe didn't include? Well, the Clayton Act strengthened the original antitrust law, explicitly listing business practices that would compromise a fair market. So no longer could businesses find loopholes around the Sherman Act. These new antitrust laws were clear and final. In fact, we still operate under these laws today. Additionally, there was the Federal Trade Commission Act, which is the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914, which enforces the Clayton Act and ensures fair practices in all markets, including housing. Any real estate business must ensure they are meeting the legal standards of the FTC by not breaking antitrust laws. The FTC Act also declared strikes, boycotts, and labor unions were legal under federal antitrust laws. This gave consumers even more power, as big businesses couldn't take advantage of them without the threat of those repercussions that they originally did face. Now, if a company were unethical in pretty much any way, consumers could stop buying its goods and can support the competition instead. If a business wasn't treating its employees well, it could organize within itself a labor union and go on strike. Essentially, acts like the Clayton Act and the Federal Trade Commission Act are the new and improved versions of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So what do you need to know for the real estate exam? Well, for the real estate exam, it's essential you're aware of what antitrust laws are and their history. Remember, antitrust laws are the collection of the federal and state government laws that regulate the conduct and organization of business corporations. Antitrust laws help a healthy real estate economy, and as a real estate professional, you must be aware of them and, of course, follow them. And it all started with the Sherman Antitrust Act. So remember that coming exam day. If you want more videos about this, specifically about antitrust laws or even fair housing in general, click the video here for more and click here to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.